I said I was going to come back and do a version of this day in Black baseball history. Of course, if I go on Facebook, I can add a few more words and it becomes this day in African American baseball history. But it's all the same. We're celebrating ball players from the colored leagues, from the Negro leagues, African American players who were great stars in the history of baseball throughout the centuries. And so this is what I do. My name is Phil S. Dixon. I'm an author and a historian. I've been at this for 45 years. So if you want some real nice history, this is where you probably need to come. If you want a bunch of fluff, go somewhere else and you'll get it. I guarantee you. You'll get a bunch of, what we say, exciting lines and no substance. So here, like I said, this is, I don't get paid for this. I don't have a job, I have a passion. And it shows after 45 years, I'm just out here doing the thing. So, but this is what we do. And so, guys, if you like this, come and stay a while. I understand, everybody's got busy lives, and so you don't stay that long, but you can always come back. If you like what we're doing, go ahead and subscribe, guys. I'm new, I've been out here, but maybe maybe I guess I'm going on 3 months. So I'm still trying to pick up those subscribers so I can get monetized. Anything you can do to help me get there is certainly appreciated. Tell your friends if they're baseball fans, if they like the Negro leagues, maybe somebody just wear the paraphernalia and they want to know what they're wearing. This is a place that you can come. Like I said, there's no fluff here. So I'm not trying to score points with some great speech that I can give on the Negro leagues. What I'm talking about is giving guys recognition who typically don't get the recognition and through the years and teams, cities, the whole thing. All right. So let's jump right in here. We have 2 minutes. So we're going to jump through. I got several things. So we're going to start with 1902. And once again, remember, I give the fact and then I give some commentary. Okay, 1902, October 3rd, 1902. Andrew Payne scored 4 runs and collected 3 hits as the Philadelphia Giants downed the Highland team in a 10-4 final at Chester, Pennsylvania's Highland Park. I always like to talk about Andrew Payne. Andrew Payne was a superb outfielder, came from Anacostia, Washington. And, if you know much about that, that's where Frederick Douglass's home is, up on the hill there in Anacostia. And so that's where he came from. He played for a series of teams, and of course, he ended up with the Philadelphia Giants in 1902. And Saul White brought him in, and they used to always say this is Saul White's protege. So, but he followed Rube Foster to Chicago, 1907. Of course, he played on that great 1910 Chicago Leland Giants team, and he went back to New York and played in the East for many years. And when he died, I think I want to say it was in the 50s or it could have been 40s. He had his body shipped back to Chicago. So he's buried in the Chicago area, even though that's not his home. But he adopted that home and they loved him in Chicago. So he decided to be buried there. And I always get the feeling that those guys had an agreement that they made somewhere along the way, maybe a pact between themselves that when I pass away, I want to be buried in Chicago. And same thing happened to Pete Hill. He was not from Chicago. He died in Buffalo, New York. But they brought his body back to Chicago, and that's where he's buried. So Andrew Payne, I wrote a lot of things about Payne. Payne was known to be temperamental, and I wrote about that in my book, Harvest on Freedom's Field, that talks about Payne probably in more detail than any other publication. So I really made a study of his life. His nickname was Jap, so you can probably imagine why they called him Jap Payne. So, all right. So let's go, let's jump a few years forward. October the 3rd, 1917, John Donaldson's All Nations pitcher struck out 11 of the Indianapolis ABCs, winning 62 at Kansas City's Association Park. If you listen to me, I talk about Association Park all the time. I grew up near Association Park, and so I used to pass it all the time. Never actually played ball there as a little kid, but it does have a park there, and of course, I know about Association Park. Know a lot about John Donaldson, too. John Donaldson was from Glasgow, Missouri. Just so happens that Glasgow is not far from Brunswick. And my family were slaves in Brunswick. And I imagine that Donaldson's family had been slaves in Glasgow because at that particular time when they opened up Missouri to settlers, a lot of people brought their slaves into Missouri. And of course, my family was in Virginia. And that's how they ended up in Missouri. And guess what? That's how I ended up in Kansas City. So it goes back to slavery, which really wasn't that long ago, guys. When I was born, my father was 49. And when he was born by his father late in life too, which means my great-grandfather was a Civil War veteran. How about that? My great-grandfather, there are people living with their great-grandfathers right now. But my great-grandfather, Howard Dixon, was a Civil War veteran, the 51st Mississippi, and his brother, who was about 3 years older, both of them came out of slavery in Louisiana, was also in the 51st Colored Mississippi, and his name was Philip Dixon. And of course, mine is shortened, Phil. I'm not Philip, I'm Phil. And I always tell people I'm Phil because that's what they called a slave. They didn't call a slave Philip, they called him Phil. All right? Okay, so that's John Donaldson. Like talking about him, should be in the Hall of Fame, guys. I'm telling you, they're sleeping on this guy. He's been up for the Hall of Fame at least 3 times, and he keeps getting passed by. One day, that's got to stop. Okay, let's go to another one. October 3rd, 1922, Sam Bennett pinch hit a triple, and Frank Warfield, still at home, helped the St. Louis Stars defeat the American League Detroit Tigers 11-7 in St. Louis. Oscar Charleston homered and stole a base during the festivities. So to me, Oscar Charleston was the first Mr. October. I don't care what you say about Reggie Jackson. Reggie was a good player, but he's 50, 60 years later, and he's Mr. October. The first Mr. October, believe me, was Oscar Charleston, because whenever they were going to play American National League team, they would always bring this guy in. And Oscar Charleston was going to make a big difference. But on this particular day, they didn't really need Oscar Charleston that much because they had Sam Bennett. Now, I remember Papa Bell telling me the story. He said that there was a lady, and she bet some money that Sam Bennett would strike out in this particular at bat. And Sam hit a triple. Now, this is a story related to me by Papa Bell. Sam Bennett hit the triple, and the lady passed out. And when they finally revived her, and the first thing she said is, "Please don't let Sam Bennett bat again." And that was the story Papa told me about Sam Bennett in this particular game. But think about this. Think about the Detroit Tigers right now, today. Just imagine this. And you could get a team that's not in the minor leagues, that basically just a team of black men that they consider to be not major league quality. And they come and they beat the Detroit Tigers. And the Detroit Tigers had their team. They had their full team there. The only person didn't play was Ty Cobb. And I know there's been a book trying to write the legacy of Ty Cobb and his racism, but of course the newspaper says old Ty Cobb wouldn't play. And there was other guys who wouldn't play. I know 1909 when the Chicago Cubs played the Leland Giants in Tech, Frank Chance wouldn't play. So there's some things that need to be written about some of these guys, and we need to tell the truth on who these players were. And so you'll know the truth, and the next generation will know the truth. And once again, I had a chance to interview Papa, who was there that day, could tell you about it, okay? So here we go. Let's go to the next one. 1924, Kansas City Monarchs and Hilldale opened the World Series in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Kansas City won that game 6-2 as Wilbur Bullet Rogan pitched an 8-hitter. Rogan is one of my favorites. I do have an entire book I wrote about Rogan, comparing him and making him, in my estimation, the greatest all-around baseball player that ever lived. That's someone who could hit and pitch. And of course, when I was coming along, they always said Babe Ruth was the greatest of who could hit and pitch. But believe me, Babe Ruth on his good days was not a Bullet Rogan. Babe Ruth could hit the long ball, and so could Bullet Rogan. But Bullet Rogan would come in, pitch a shutout, hit a home run, and practically win his own baseball game. That's how good he was. And I always like to tell people, Bullet Rogan was a 10-second man. He could run a 100-yard dash in 10 seconds. Now, somebody knew Babe Ruth couldn't do that. I always like to tell that story. So if you're coming to some of my talks, I really get into it. All right, so Bullet Rogan from my hometown, Kansas City, Kansas. When I wrote the book, I knew many people who grew up around Rogan. They were older people at that time. I knew people who knew his brother, Willard Rogan. I knew people who knew his stepmother. I knew relatives to his stepmother that were there. And of course, I knew, excuse me, Billy Rogan's son real well. I knew him real well. And his granddaughter, Billy Rogan's granddaughter, has even been to my house here where we're doing this broadcast right now. So love talking about Billy Rogan. Guys, if you want to read about a great player and you want to read about some all-around ball players who could hit for power, hit for average, could pitch, you got to look at two guys that I want you to look up. One of them is Martin Diego. And I think they pronounce, I just was speaking to one of his relatives. She said it's Martin Diego. Diego is kind of like the H, you just kind of glitz right past it. And I met his granddaughter and his great-granddaughter up in Rocky Mount about a month ago. So, all right. So those are two guys you might want to look up. And when these sportscasters, they always want to talk about Shiny and Tiny, and they want to relate him to Babe Ruth. Guys, there's more to the story. Just don't get hung up on that. All right? So you can challenge some of this stuff that's being presented to you. All right? Okay, let's go to another one. 1925. So Kansas City won that first World Series in 2024, right? They won the whole World Series. Now, the next year, Kansas City's in the World Series again. So on October 3rd, 1925 now, Hilldale defeated the Kansas City Monarchs by a 3-1 score in 10 innings to capture the third game of the 1925 World Series. One of the reasons the Monarchs lost that World Series is because of Billy Rogan's absence. Billy Rogan, before the series, they had beat St. Louis, the Kansas City Monarchs had, and he was at home playing with his son, and he's a needle stuck into his knee, and so they couldn't get the needle out. They tried everything, strong magnets. They tried everything without having to do surgery. And of course, they didn't have any orthoscopic things back then, so they had to cut his leg, and he was not able to pitch in that series. And then Dink Martha, who from Topeka, Kansas, Dink Martha, one of the guys who I knew who got me started in this in 1980, Dink Martha was also injured. So with those two guys missing, the Monarchs were at a deficit, and they pretty much lost the series of 4-1. If I remember, Nelson Dean won the only game. I remember talking to Chet Brewer about Nelson Dean, and they always called him Smiling Charlie. And he was from Muskogee, Oklahoma. And I'll tell you what, now remember I said this is Bill Dixon with commentary, right? So I'm giving you commentary. This is stuff that guys I just know in my head. But if you go to Muskogee, Dean's family was heavily involved with the church there. And his family church was Dean's Chapel. And if you look it up, guys, Dean's Chapel is still there in Muskogee. I haven't been to that Dean's Chapel, but I've been to Muskogee several times to speak. So definitely know about Muskogee and Dean's Chapel and Nelson Dean. Nelson Dean ended up going to St. Louis, and that's where he passed away. He had a son also played in the Negro Leagues as well. So that was the only game the Monarchs were able to win in that 25 World Series. So I may end up mentioning that a couple of days. So let's jump to 1931. October 3rd, 1931. Steve O'Neill's Big League All-Stars are blasted 18-0, defeated by the Homestead Grays at Cleveland's Municipal Stadium. Big leaguer George Ewell, Dutch Henry, and Carl Scoof were batted for 15 hits, and Josh Gibson hit a pair of home runs. Man, if you don't know, how about this? If you don't know who Josh Gibson is and you follow the Negro Leagues, then you need to pick up a book and go crack a book or something, a bunch of books. Josh Gibson was just a premier hitter. And what's interesting is, I'm not sure, but I think this was the first multiple home run game, or the first time a player hit multiple home runs in Municipal Stadium. Municipal Stadium, the old mistake on the lake is what they called it. And it was built in 1931. And that's, at that particular time, Cleveland was vying to get the Olympics. Of course, Los Angeles built the Coliseum, and they ended up getting the Olympics. Cleveland did not. So now they have this big 80,000 seat stadium, and the Cleveland Indians, whenever they played there, anybody played there. You drew 35,000, which was a good crowd for Old League Park, but where Cleveland played. But you put 30,000 in a stadium that has 80,000, seats, man, it looks like nobody's there. You can never sell season tickets. And so that's the old mistake on the lake. And in 1992, I did an interview in that ballpark. So I had a chance to actually go there, even though I'm from Kansas City. So the old Cleveland Municipal Stadium. And so the Indians don't play there. Of course, they're not the Indians anymore. They're the Guardians, okay? All right, then let's go to, got two more, and then I'm out of here. Got October 3rd, 58. I was 2 years old at this time. George Crowe is traded to the St. Louis Cardinals for Alex Kellner, Alex Gramlis, and Bobby Maybe, Eddie Casco, and Dale Ennis. Wait a minute. He was traded, let me make sure I got, okay, no, he was traded with Kellner and Alex Gramlis for for three players. So you got three players and a swap. George Crowe was a tremendous basketball player too. And I don't know how much you know about George Crowe. He was a tremendous home run hitter too. And he held several pinch hit home run records. So yeah, I used to have his baseball cards in sets through the 50s when I would get older sets and I would see a lot on George Crowe. Never did get his autograph. Maybe I should go out there and see if I can get one of his autographs to go with these cards I have. So George Crowe traded to the St. Louis Cardinals. All right. My last one for today, October 3rd, 1974. Now I was graduating from high school. I graduated that year. As a matter of fact, I was on the road traveling with the band shortly thereafter when this happened. And I always follow sports. So I would pick up the newspaper and I would still follow my sports even though I was at that time a working professional musician. So anyway, Frank Robinson, age 39, replaced Cleveland Indians manager Ken Astromonte to become the American League's baseball's first African-American manager. Robinson's new one-year contract as manager will be for $180,000, making him the highest paid manager in baseball. And so at that time, he was a playing manager too. So that was, his salary was included in that. And so guys, just imagine the salaries that people are getting now. And matter of fact, the last playing manager I remember was Pete Rose. I don't know, somebody can correct me if there's been somebody since then. But Frank Robinson, I had the honor of meeting Frank Robinson. I'll tell you a quick story. I used to be assistant director of public relations for the Kansas City Royals. So I had access to all the players. And I also wrote for the Kansas City Call, which is an African-American newspaper, prior to that. So I was in the clubhouse all the time doing articles and interviews. But I wrote an article about Frank Robinson, comparing him to making him the modern day Rube Foster. And so I went to Frank and I gave him a copy of this article. We were having a conversation, and I had a publication from Puerto Rico, because he had managed down in the Puerto Rican Winter League. Now what's interesting is that's one of the things that he had done is to prepare himself to get to that big league job. So he didn't just come on the bench and then go. He had been managing down in winter ball for Puerto Rico. So anyway, I have a book and had his picture in there and when he was managing. So after I gave him the article, I said, hey, Frank. Now Frank didn't sign autographs, by the way, but I said, hey, Frank, will you sign my book for me? And I remember Frank said, I knew this article was going to cost me something. And he went ahead and signed it for me, and I have it still to this day in my collection. The Puerto Rican yearbook signed by Frank Robinson. So that's a personal treasure. And Frank was a real upfront guy. I got a chance to see him many times and talk to him about baseball. But he was one of my favorite players growing up. Great hitter. And I remember he was telling me, I have to think of the player right now, but when he was, I will call the guy's name, but Frank told me when he was in the minor leagues, he copied his stance off a former Negro leaguer who was on the team with him. I'm drawing a blank on the name right now, but I have it in my records though. So if I ever write about it, I'll have the name correctly. So anyway, guys, that does it for me. This is my second broadcast of the night. The first one, you can go back and look at it. I was showing you, getting the record straight on Dan McQuillan and show you how these people are misleading us on these statistics. So that's going to do it for me tonight. I'm going to an event down at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum tomorrow, and I've got a Willie Randolph bat here, right, guys? So I'm gonna get a gold pen, and I'm gonna have Willie Randolph sign that because he's gonna be there tomorrow. And I went to my collection. I got a photograph of Dusty Baker. I want him to sign. One of Cito Gaston that I want him to sign. Don't have one of Ron Emanuel. He's gonna be there tomorrow. So I hope he doesn't feel left out. So just don't have one, but I do have one of those other guys. So that does it for me tonight. I've got a few other things to do, and the baseball game, I think it's off now, but I was watching that earlier, so I don't know who won, the Yankees or the Red Sox. I have to go look. I've been on here. I don't know. I couldn't see it. But thank you guys. It's about 20 minutes. I'll get out of here at 21 minutes. Thank you guys. If you like what I'm doing here, subscribe. I'm new to this, and before you can get monetized, you got to at least have 1,000 subscribers. Then you got to start logging some hours. So the conversation will get better and better and better. And like I say, I'm getting more relaxed, and I'm saying as much as I can, telling stories, and trying to let you know, guys, that this history is real. This history is real, and we need to celebrate these people. And it's a daggum shame that we went centuries, decades, not even mentioning them here. So now we're talking about them, but guys, we're not talking about them clearly as we should. And that's part of what I've been doing. And I remember Buck O'Neill used to always say to me, he said, "You're the one who started all of this." And he didn't mean that I wrote the first book. I didn't write the first book on the Negro Leagues. But he realized that the passion I had in telling this story and traveling around and getting other people involved indirectly, not always directly, but indirectly, has kept this history going. So I'm in my 45th year, so guys, that does it for me. So thank you for joining me tonight. Guys, go ahead and subscribe. Hey, I want to get monetized. I want to see if you can actually make money from this. Right now, I'm making money from my books and personal appearances, and I'll keep on doing that. But it'd be nice to keep revenue streams coming from all over the place, right? Hey, in this economy, you never can have enough money. Am I right or am I wrong? All right then, guys. Thank you, and I appreciate you joining in tonight, and we will see you soon.